Cynthia's eyes drooped as she stared at the presents given to her elder sister by a cocoa merchant in town. As soon as the servants sent by the merchant to deliver the message left, Cynthia stormed into her room in disgust and discontent. She paced around, hissing repeatedly in annoyance. "So Antonia is the only one meant to enjoy the good things of life, while I'm always neglected?" She asked no one in particular. Cynthia clapped her hands angrily and swept the items on the table to the floor. Antonia wasn't around when the cocoa merchant brought the gifts. Only their blind mother was at home, and their father had gone hunting. The poor woman who couldn't see what was going on was surprised at the outburst in the room. She walked to the room with the help of her stick and asked Cynthia what was going on. Cynthia lied, telling her mother that something had fallen from her hand while she was searching for a gown in her wardrobe, and in the process, it hit the items on the table, causing them to fall to the floor. "Be careful, my daughter," her mother said softly and returned to her seat in the parlor. When her mother left, Cynthia muttered under her breath, "Old hag," and hissed. She almost hissed loudly, but managed to do it quietly to avoid alerting her mother to her anger. The same pretense Cynthia showed when her mother entered the room was the same one she had displayed when the cocoa merchant's servants delivered the gifts. The cocoa merchant was one of the many men in town interested in marrying Antonia. From a young age, Antonia had always attracted a favorable number of suitors. Unfortunately for Cynthia, she didn't receive as much attention, and she didn't find the few men who showed interest in her as attractive as her sister's suitors. This deepened Cynthia's resentment toward Antonia. She began to harbor hatred for her sister, seeing her as someone who constantly stole the spotlight. Cynthia considered her an embodiment of bad luck in her own life, and often longed for the things Antonia had. Her envy didn't start in adulthood. It had existed since childhood. Cynthia had always wished for her sister's good looks, believing they brought her so many favors. But as the saying goes, if wishes were horses, she couldn't have what she wanted just by longing for them. "Mummy, I'm home!" Antonia shouted from the entrance, excitement in her voice as she returned from the market square. Antonia was a fabric trader, while Cynthia sold food. Cynthia usually sold in the early hours of the morning and returned home by afternoon. "My love, how have you been? Hope the market was good today?" their mother asked with warmth, and Antonia responded cheerfully to all her questions. "You didn't ask me how the market went today, Mama. But as usual, you'll always ask your favorite child," Cynthia remarked. "Ah, Cynthia, my mind must have wandered. I truly forgot to ask, but I did ask how your day went when you returned from the market." "I'm sorry about that. I'll remember to ask you tomorrow," their mother replied sincerely. Cynthia burst into laughter and quickly composed herself as though she wasn't upset. "Chai, Mama, you take everything seriously. I was only joking," she said playfully. "Maybe we should start preparing dinner with the cocoyams the cocoa merchant brought for my lovely sister," Cynthia said suddenly. "Cocoyams? Who brought them?" Antonia asked. "You just heard me say the cocoa merchant, my dear sister. One of your many suitors in town. It seems he's more persistent than the rest. His persistence is quite noticeable and admirable. I must say, it's commendable. After all, persistent people often win the race in life, even when they're undeserving," Cynthia mocked. "Where are the cocoyams?" Antonia asked again. "They're outside in a corner, and it wasn't just cocoyams. He also sent some expensive clothing. I'm surprised you didn't notice them," Cynthia replied. "What's going on here?" their father asked as he walked into the room. Cynthia quickly filled him in on the situation. "Chike knows I don't accept his gifts, so I wonder why he keeps sending them," Antonia said, clearly frustrated. She wasn't happy with the gifts Cynthia claimed Cheek had sent through his servants. Antonia wished Cheek would realize he couldn't buy her love with gifts. What mattered more were the qualities of a gentleman, something he clearly lacked and made no effort to improve. Chike had a way of bragging about the things he had, and the way he treated those that worked for him was highly offensive. No one that had ever worked for him had good records about him, and that didn't speak well of him for Antonia. Regardless of Chike's wealth, Antonia didn't find him worthy of her approval, and her reasons were reasonable to an extent. Since Antonia had made it clear to her dad reasons why she continuously rejected Chike's proposal, he didn't find it hard to agree with her to return the gift items the next day.
Who does she even think she is? Cynthia muttered under her breath after Antonia announced her decision to return the gift items Chike had sent. Cynthia wished Chike would stop paying attention to her sister and ask her out instead. She had often fantasized about the moment he'd come to her after her sister rejected him. But Chike's relentless pursuit, despite Antonia's blunt refusals, made Cynthia sick with jealousy and simmering anger. If only Chike would stop looking in her direction, I'd gladly accept him if he asked me out, Cynthia soliloquized in her room. To Cynthia, Chike was the perfect man. She couldn't relate to her sister's dismissive judgments about him. In fact, she chalked them up to pure pride. Cynthia saw Antonia as someone undeserving of the blessings she had, a prideful being who took everything for granted. The next day, with the help of wheelbarrow pushers from the town, Antonia returned the gift items to Chike's doorstep. The moment one of Chike's servants informed him, he stormed out of his room with a deep frown etched across his face. By then, Antonia had already walked a fair distance. Chike couldn't catch up to her, so he ordered one of his servants to call her back. The servant managed to catch up with her, but Antonia wouldn't stop. She refused to hear a word. There was nothing left to discuss. Her actions had already spelled things out clearly. Listening to Chike now would only prolong what she wanted to put behind her. When the servant returned and relayed her cold refusal, Chike stood stupefied. His ego stung. Antonia's constant rejection, despite his efforts, had begun to make him feel like a fool. How dare she? I'll make her regret this, he muttered furiously, pounding his chest in frustration before storming back into his room. His anger consumed him. Eyes burning red with rage, he grabbed a jug of palm wine from his table and drank deeply. Afterward, he collapsed onto his bed, seething in silence. Meanwhile, Antonia, unaware of his emotional storm, returned home, bathed, and began preparing her goods for the market square. Cynthia had already left earlier that morning to sell her food. She was always in a hurry, determined not to miss her daily sales target. "May the heavens bless you," their mother prayed as Antonia stepped out. "Amen," she responded, heading off with purpose. Later that afternoon, as Cynthia finished selling, she balanced her large food cooler on her head, with another bag on her side. While walking, she spotted Chike ahead. The moment she saw him, she veered toward his direction. "Good afternoon, Chike," she greeted, but he didn't respond. From his posture and expression, Cynthia could tell something was wrong. He looked disturbed. "Ah!" she gasped internally, suddenly recalling Antonia's gift return earlier that morning. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need a moment of your time," Cynthia said. Chike sighed. "All right, but be quick. I've got something important to do." "You're heading to the market square to meet my sister, right?" Cynthia asked, reading his body language. "Yes." "And what about it?" He snapped, still reeling from Antonia's morning actions. What angered him more was that she had returned every single item this time. At least the first ones had been accepted. What Chike didn't know was that Antonia had objected from the beginning, but her father had accepted the first gifts on her behalf. It wasn't until she explained her stance that he finally supported her fully, even regarding the return of the remaining items. "Don't use that tone on me. I'm not responsible for my sister's actions," Cynthia yelled, annoyed at his rudeness. Chike hissed and continued walking. "You're such a fool," Cynthia shouted behind him when he ignored her. Chike stopped, fists clenched in anger. Cynthia burst into laughter. "Go ahead and hit me. Give my sister more reasons to reject you, coward." Those words hit Chike like a slap. Immediately, his rage dissolved into guilt. He turned, his posture softened. "I'm sorry, Cynthia," he said. He realized then that he had let his anger blind him. What he had underestimated was Cynthia's capacity to twist the narrative, and worse, use it to her advantage. What Chike didn't yet know was that Cynthia envied her sister more than words could describe, and had secretly wished he belonged to her instead.
"Your apology isn't accepted," Cynthia said coolly. "Anyway, your persistence is what made me decide to have a word with you. I pity you whenever my sister rejects your advances. You're a good-looking man, and wealthy too. Antonia must be a fool not to see that." Chike sighed deeply. "I wonder why Antonia doesn't find me appealing. If only you would listen to me, you'd win her heart," Cynthia whispered into his ear. "Really, what's your advice?" "How can I win her heart?" Chike asked desperately. Let's become friends. I'll help you in whatever little way I can. I actually think you're the best suitor my sister has had so far, Cynthia said. Thank you so much. But what's in it for you if we become friends, Chike asked. My sister's happiness. That's all, Cynthia lied smoothly. If you're really planning to go to the market square to confront her, I suggest you change your mind. That won't help you. Instead, surprise her by staying calm. If you do want to see her, make sure it's to resolve things amicably. Thank you. I'll just head back home instead. I appreciate you stopping me from doing something stupid. Here, take this. Chike handed her a few crisp Naira notes. Thank you, Cynthia said with a wink as she held his hand. Since you're heading home, let's walk together, she suggested, and Chike smiled. As they walked, Chike didn't offer to help Cynthia with her load, even though his hands were completely free. He was the only child of wealthy parents and had been poorly raised. He lacked good manners and believed that money alone defined a man. Still, despite his flaws, Cynthia was determined to have him. Her plan to get close to him by pretending to be his ally didn't appeal to her at first, but it was the only way she could secure what she wanted. Her proposal to help him win Antonia's heart was never about Chike. It was all about herself. In reality, she had zero intention of helping him win her sister over. All she wanted was to draw him closer to her. Cynthia and Chike parted ways as they neared his house. Their paths diverged, so she waved him goodbye. Chike returned the wave and hurried toward his compound. When Cynthia got home, she went straight to her room and tucked away some of the money she'd made from sales into her savings box under the bed. The remaining cash, still in her apron pocket, she slipped beneath the mattress. She planned to visit the market later in the day to buy supplies for her next round of sales. Though she could have stopped at the market on her way home, she had something else in mind. Something she considered more important than groceries. Her schemes had to come first. Not long after she settled in, her mother woke up from a nap. Cynthia frowned slightly when the old woman announced that she was starving. Her mother hadn't eaten all day. Normally, she bought pap and moi from a vendor in town, who was also her customer and one of her regulars. Antonia usually provided money for her mother's breakfast, often paying the vendor in advance for the week. But that morning, the vendor hadn't shown up. She had fallen ill. Cynthia's mother, being blind and unable to go around town on her own, had waited patiently for someone to assist her. She had hoped Cynthia would return early enough, knowing her husband and Antonia wouldn't be back until later. Why can't you just wait for your favorite daughter, the one you're always praising, and leave me out of it? Cynthia muttered under her breath, her voice laced with contempt. Mama, there's no leftover, she added aloud, and I didn't make much sales today, so I don't have anything to help you with. The little I made is for tomorrow's preparation. But you said there's no leftover, her mother said, confused, which means you sold everything. Please, anything you can spare. I'm starving. Cynthia rolled her eyes and responded coldly. The fact that I sold everything doesn't mean I made great sales. I had to bring the prices down so I wouldn't have leftover. You'll have to wait for Antonia. She'll be back in about 3 hours. Her mother continued pleading, but Cynthia ignored her and eventually left for the market, murmuring under her breath about how suffocated she felt. Her envy had eaten so deep that her sense of compassion and reasoning had become dulled. While heading to the market, Cynthia noticed a young man pacing nervously in town. At first, she thought he was a troublemaker or a kidnapper and instinctively avoided him. But the man called out to her repeatedly, and after much persistence, she finally stopped to listen. The young man introduced himself as a cloth merchant. He said he had come on the prince's request, but had misplaced his phone on the way, making it impossible to contact the palace for directions. Please, can you help me find the way to the palace? He pleaded. Cynthia eyed him from head to toe, cautiously studying the bag he carried. The man opened it slightly, revealing stunning fabrics, luxurious enough to suggest he was telling the truth. Once convinced he meant no harm, Cynthia directed him to the palace. Grateful, the man offered her one of his fabrics in appreciation. The material was beautiful, though Cynthia secretly wished he had given her a different one. Still, she smiled and accepted the gift. Thank you so much, beauty, the man said warmly as he walked away. After he left, Cynthia mocked his words in a playful tone before continuing on her way to the market. When she returned home, she was surprised to find Antonia already back. It was unusual for her sister to return so early, and Cynthia's curiosity grew. "I can't believe how cruel you are, Cynthia," Antonia said the moment she walked into the room. "What did I do?" Cynthia feigned ignorance. "Don't pretend you don't know. We're talking about your own mother, for God's sake." "I still don't get what you're talking about." Antonia gestured toward a plate of rice and fish on the floor. Their mother sat nearby, leaning against the wall with her arms akimbo, sighing deeply. "Wait, Mama, I hope you haven't bad-mouthed me in my absence." "I told you I didn't make good sales today," Cynthia said defensively. Her mother shook her head silently. "Low sales indeed," Antonia scoffed, clapping her hands. "Mama, come and eat. Imagine if I hadn't run into a Kogwu at the market who told me the moi woman was sick. You would have let our mother starve until I got back, right?" Antonia helped their mother sit properly and directed her hand to the plate. The old woman could feed herself once properly guided, though she occasionally spilled some of the food. As their mother began eating, Cynthia stared at her sister with a scornful look. Then she hissed softly and stormed into her room. "Why is she always trying to prove she's better than me?" she muttered bitterly. She sorted through the ingredients she had bought while her mind drifted back to the confrontation. Eventually, she lay down and drifted off to sleep. In her dream, she saw Antonia getting married to the prince and living lavishly in a royal palace. What irked Cynthia most was that the prince, in the dream, had met Antonia through her, but had fallen in love with her sister instead. "Over my dead body will I be your slave, Antonia," Cynthia snarled as she awoke, spitting angrily on the floor. The dream Cynthia had disturbed her deeply, so much so that she refused to eat her portion of the evening meal when it was served. At first, Antonia assumed it was Cynthia's conscience pricking her, so she didn't panic. It wasn't until she observed Cynthia talking to herself that she realized something was genuinely wrong. Antonia considered approaching her sister to ask what was troubling her, but the look on Cynthia's face when she attempted to come closer made her retreat. Seeing Cynthia didn't want company, Antonia quietly went back to her seat and waited for their father's return. His delay was unusual, and as time crept past, Antonia grew increasingly anxious. By 8:40 p.m., with no sign of her father, Antonia could no longer sit still. Fear and paranoia surged within her as she stepped out into the night and began alerting people in the town to help look for him. Her father was widely known for his hunting skills and many respected him. The news of his absence quickly sparked concern, and despite the late hour, a number of people volunteered to help her search. Meanwhile, Cynthia, annoyed and preoccupied, didn't see anything alarming about Antonia's sudden departure. She assumed her sister was simply being dramatic, until their mother broke down in tears and explained that it was she who had suggested Antonia seek help to search for her husband. They had both been waiting for his return, even while Cynthia had fallen asleep. The meal Antonia had prepared that night was her father's favorite. She hoped that serving it would lift his spirits after what she assumed had been a long day. But as time passed, Antonia and their mother concluded that something was terribly wrong. Their father would never stay out that late without informing them, not when he knew how much they worried about him. "As usual, I'm always the last to know what happens in this family," Cynthia hissed. "Antonia could have called me so we'd help together. But no, she always acts like the hero, making me look bad." "Why do you always turn everything into a competition?" her mother replied, clearly frustrated. "If you really cared, you'd be outside by now, helping instead of speaking ill of your own sister." No, I'm staying here. I'm sure Daddy is fine," Cynthia said, crossing her arms. "Besides, you can't see, and it's late. It's not safe to leave you here alone. I'll just wait for the outcome. All this drama is unnecessary." Her mother turned to her with a look of disbelief. "What have you become, Cynthia? What have you grown into? The way you think. Honestly, it troubles me." "I've grown into someone beautiful, Mom, and beauty is what Antonia lacks," Cynthia replied smugly. "It's useless exchanging words with you," her mother said bitterly. "If you had any sense, you'd be on your knees praying for your father's safety. But no, you're here playing childish games and proving how senseless you've become. Competing with your sister, even in a moment like this, makes me want to spit in your face. If you can't help ease my worries, then please leave my presence." Cynthia stood still, her mother's harsh words stinging more than she expected. What cut deeper was the fact that her mother had said all that in Antonia's defense. While Cynthia was locked in her bitterness, Antonia was out in the dark, searching for her father alongside the volunteers. The men were about to call off the search and return home, promising to continue at first light, when a faint, shrill cry pierced the night. They stopped and listened intently, pressing their ears toward the ground. The sound came again. Someone was crying out, struggling for life. It came from deep within a nearby farm. The men hadn't ventured far into that area earlier. It was late, and the threat of wild animals loomed large. They had assumed that calling out his name while searching around the town would be enough. "Father!" Antonia cried out, running toward the sound as the others followed. There they found him. His face was pale, and he was clutching his thigh in excruciating pain. "It's a snake bite," one of the men said grimly, "and a deadly one at that." A medicine man among them stepped forward quickly, but Antonia fell to her knees, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "Father! Father!" Antonia stared into her father's eyes, but he couldn't speak. Instead, he groaned loudly in sheer agony. "Let's look around. The snake might still be close by," the medicine man said. The men searched the area thoroughly but found no sign of the snake. As soon as they confirmed it was safe, the medicine man got to work. He found a nearby herb, crushed it between his palms, and rubbed it on Antonia's father's face and body. Then he tore a piece of cloth from his hem and used it to tightly bandage the wounded area. "This will stop the poison from spreading completely until he receives full treatment," the medicine man explained. With the help of 2 other men, Antonia's father was carried out of the forest. His pulse was faint, and his face had gone pale. As they made their way to the medicine man's house, Antonia wept uncontrollably. She knew the news would crush her mother's heart. Her fear deepened when her father began to shiver uncontrollably. Thankfully, they reached their destination just in time, and treatment began immediately. "It's a bite from a black snake," the medicine man said grimly, inspecting the wound. "A very deadly one." He carefully cut into the area to remove the bad blood. Antonia's father screamed in pain and clenched his teeth tightly. The wound had become swollen, and the poison was already spreading, threatening his vital organs. Thankfully, they had reached him just in time. After administering a mix of herbal antidotes, Antonia stayed a little while longer, thanking the medicine man profusely before heading home to break the news to her family. When she arrived, she met her mother pacing in distress, and Cynthia was busy sorting the ingredients she planned to use the next day. Antonia tried to keep herself composed so as not to alarm them too much. As soon as she revealed what had happened, their mother burst into panic and begged to be taken to see her husband. Antonia gently explained that it was already late, and since her father had been attended to, they would visit him first thing in the morning. The medicine man had assured her he would be fine. Cynthia was visibly shaken. She dropped everything she was holding and put her hands on her head, crying deeply. The house was filled with tension, and sleep escaped everyone that night. At dawn, Antonia held her mother's hand and led her to the medicine man's home. Inside the room, their mother sat beside her husband, touching his wrist and chest to feel his condition. Though blind, she used her hands with care and precision. She whispered prayers, begging him to stay strong. He couldn't speak but nodded slightly in response, his strength drained from the treatment. After making sure he was stable, they left the house, showering the medicine man with gratitude. He declined any form of payment. "Your father is a good man," he told Antonia privately. "I'll do everything I can to make sure he recovers." Later that day, Cynthia's phone rang. It was Chikai. She hadn't noticed his earlier missed calls until she checked her phone. She stepped outside to take the call. Chikai explained that he wanted to visit, but he feared Antonia might reject him again. Cynthia told him plainly that if he wanted to come, he should avoid bringing gifts or offering money to her sister. Any help he wanted to render should come through her, and she would convince Antonia to accept it. With Cynthia's green light, Chikai arrived in the evening. As expected, Antonia was upset and asked him to leave, but Cynthia intervened. "He only came because he was worried about what happened to Dad," Cynthia defended. I shouldn't be here, Chica said softly, turning to Antonia, especially since you don't want to see me. I'm deeply sorry about last time. I know you didn't approve of me or my gifts. I was wrong to bring them in your absence. I promise to be a better man, the kind you deserve. He gently took Antonia's hands. Cynthia turned away, her face twisted in envy. The sight of them together drained her. Your apology is accepted, Antonia said coldly, but your proposals are unnecessary right now. I'm not in the mood. I understand, Chica replied. I just needed to be here. I was so worried when I heard about your father. I'm glad he's responding well to treatment. The whole town misses him, especially those who smile whenever he returns from hunting. Please stay strong. Don't let this weigh you down. He patted Antonia on the back. And one more thing, he added with a smile. I'll always be here if you need me. My arms are wide open. Antonia nodded slightly. As Chica was about to leave, the prince passed by with his guards. The moment Cynthia saw him, her mind flashed back to the strange dream she had, and her heart began to race with paranoia. Cynthia's paranoia was so obvious that her sister moved closer to her and asked what was wrong with her all of a sudden. Cheek paused to be sure Cynthia was all right before taking his leave. I'm fine, Cynthia replied sharply to her sister. She didn't want to attract pity or unwanted attention. I think I need to go in while you two talk, she said and began to leave. He's about going now, Antonia said, just as Cheeky set off from the compound. Cheek couldn't stop looking back as he made his way home. He was glad he had been able to talk to Antonia, with Cynthia's help, and had a reward in mind to express his gratitude. When he arrived home, he thanked Cynthia profusely for her help and told her he had something in return for the huge favor. Being able to speak with Antonia was a big deal for him. He had often fantasized about getting her to tie the knot with him. He couldn't see any other lady in town who possessed what he desired in a woman as much as Antonia did, and he was determined to do whatever it took to win her over. 2 days later, Antonia's father returned home after being confirmed healthy and fit by the medicine man. His return drew the full attention of his family, especially his first daughter, who wouldn't let him out of her sight. Antonia refused to go to the market square for her daily sales, unlike Cynthia, who resumed immediately after their father's return. Antonia devoted her business hours entirely to caring for him and making sure he had everything he needed. Cynthia's reason for resuming her business was to get a breath of fresh air outside the house. With each passing day, her sister's presence suffocated her. She often wished she could just disappear into thin air. Cynthia struggled with her goal of getting Cheek's attention. Aside from being his ally, Cheek had no other intentions and didn't suspect any ulterior motive behind Cynthia's actions beyond their agreed plans. The fact that he ignored all the hints she gave whenever they met irritated her deeply. Cynthia disliked that her help was only drawing Cheek closer to Antonia. What she wanted was slipping further out of reach, and she was receiving the opposite of what she had hoped for. Worse still, with Antonia's continued guidance, Cheek was fast becoming a changed man, and that riled Cynthia even more. What do I do to separate them? Oh, I've fed myself poison, Cynthia lamented one evening when she saw her sister sitting under a tree with Cheek as she returned from the stream. The two were engrossed in conversation and laughter, not even noticing her presence as she passed. For a moment, Cynthia felt like confronting them, but she knew it would only make her look like a fool. She went home with a heavy heart filled with venom. Even a blind man could sense the rage burning within her. Cynthia's malicious plans came to light on her sister's birthday. Cheek had planned to celebrate it in a big way and had shared the details with Cynthia. The fabric he bought for the occasion was of the highest quality. He gave it his best, his heart, and his money. Cheek told Cynthia that he planned to invite his wealthy merchant friends and introduce Antonia to many people in his life, including family members visiting town for the celebration. Little did he know that he had shared his plans with the wrong person, someone who nursed a sinister motive after hearing everything. On the day of the celebration, Cynthia injected a purging-inducing substance into Antonia's meal, in large quantity. Her intention was to make her sister embarrass herself during the party. Before buying the substance, she had confirmed its potency. The native doctor she got it from believed her story. In tears, Cynthia had told him that the substance was meant for a woman who had snatched her man and had the audacity to flaunt it in her face. Without verifying her deceitful tale, The native doctor sold the substance to her at a high price. The money Cynthia used to buy it was the same money Cheek had given her as a thank you gift for helping him get closer to Antonia. Unfortunately for Antonia, the substance began to take effect just as she was called up to the stage by the MC. Right on cue, Antonia felt a sharp pinch in her intestines. When she rubbed her stomach, it only worsened. She was about to excuse herself from the event when the diarrhea hit uncontrollably, making a mess of herself in the spotlight. Never had Cheek felt so embarrassed in his life. The majority of his friends had attended the birthday party, along with some of his family members. "What am I supposed to tell them?" he soliloquized, staring at Antonia, who stood there confused and humiliated. Antonia's eyes welled with tears as she struggled to leave the crowd in her soiled state. While running, she had another uncontrollable accident. She covered her ears to block out the harsh words coming from the guests. "What just happened to me?" she cried, running away from the party. Cheek, unsure of what to say to the people he had invited, simply stood still in shock as questions were thrown at him. "Does she have some sort of disorder?" an elderly man asked. Cheek shook his head in response. Cynthia returned to the party while Cheek was still being questioned by his family about the type of woman he almost made the mistake of marrying. As Cynthia approached, she wore a calm smile and an innocent expression. Seeing how empty the place had become, she knew her plan had worked. Still, she felt a bit disappointed that she hadn't witnessed the chaos herself. While the party was ongoing, the herbalist had called her persistently. To avoid raising suspicion, she had stepped out to answer the call. The herbalist wasn't calling to check on her success, he was calling to warn her. He told her that continued use of the substance could lead to death. He added that if administered in large quantities, the victim could suffer runny stools for 3 consecutive days. Cynthia hadn't waited to hear any of this when she bought the substance. She had left hurriedly, and it was only because the herbalist had exchanged contact with her earlier that he could reach her afterward. The first warning scared her a little, but the second part gave her immense joy. She had used a large amount, so her sister was bound to suffer from prolonged diarrhea. The party venue now smelled terribly, and those who remained covered their noses in disgust. When Cynthia asked Cheek what had happened, he explained the situation, and she immediately burst into tears. "I should have told you about her condition," Cynthia sobbed. "What condition?" Cheek asked, startled. "It's not the first time my sister has done something like this. In fact, she still wets the bed," Cynthia said quietly, after pulling Cheek aside. She didn't want to spin her web of lies in front of his family and friends. Those people were too perceptive. Knowing Cheek was already upset, Cynthia seized the opportunity. She warned him that continuing with Antonia would be at his own risk, as the condition had been present since childhood and had never been treated. Her words struck Cheek like a knife. It was hard to believe, and even harder to accept. He looked at Cynthia in disbelief, tears forming in his eyes. Later that day, Cheek decided to visit Antonia to confirm what he had heard, but his heart broke when he stepped into her room and saw the mess. "She soils herself 3 times a month. Are you willing to cope with that kind of disorder?" Cynthia's words echoed in his mind as he stared at the scene. News of what had happened to Antonia spread throughout the village. She couldn't go out for her daily sales due to overwhelming shame. While Antonia wept and mourned her humiliation, Cynthia was basking in bliss, watching her sister's life fall apart. Cynthia went to the backyard to have a good laugh after she peeped through the door upon returning from the market square and met her sister in intense tears. She had a big smile on her face as she watched her sister in misery, while their mother's efforts to comfort her proved abortive. Cynthia was enjoying everything, from her sister's inability to show her face in town to the fact that she had limited movement ever since the incident happened. Even children around the village took turns mocking Antonia whenever she dared to go out. The situation might have been managed if it hadn't repeated itself when Antonia summoned the courage to fetch water at the stream, 4 days after the incident at the party. Antonia had fetched the water and was about to head home when her stomach began to rumble. It rumbled so violently that she nearly yelled in fright. She rubbed her belly intensely, recognizing the same feelings she had experienced at the party and in her room. Antonia walked as fast as she could, hoping she wouldn't embarrass herself again. But the situation was out of control. She ended up defecating and making a mess of herself before she got home. Since then, she hadn't had the courage to go out again, except when it was dark. Even in the dark, she became a subject of mockery when recognized. Cynthia was still having a good laugh when the herbalist's call came in. Immediately, she saw the call. She hissed loudly and stared at the phone screen in disgust. "This Baba is becoming more of a nuisance now," she muttered while standing akimbo. Cynthia didn't like seeing the herbalist's calls. They made her extremely nervous. Besides, she didn't need more of his services at the moment and believed she should be the one calling, not him. When the call came in the third time, Cynthia picked it up grudgingly. The herbalist's voice sounded harsh and unusual. The way he demanded her presence immediately made her shudder. "I can't come today. I'm busy and I have a lot to do," Cynthia responded angrily on the phone. Before ending the call, the herbalist made it clear that she was to appear at his shrine the next day, or face the consequences of ignoring his orders. Then he cut the call before she could respond. Cynthia's laughter turned into a frown. She became deep in thought and terribly scared. Her mind wandered, trying to figure out why the herbalist had called in such a threatening manner. When Cynthia went inside, she ignored her sister and mother and went straight to her room. There, she decided she would go see the herbalist the next day to find out what had gone wrong. The following day, Cynthia woke up early and left the house after taking her bath. She lied to her mother and father, telling them she was going to see a customer who lived in the neighboring town. Her words were rushed, and her anxious demeanor didn't go unnoticed. When her parents asked about her strange behavior, she claimed it was due to stress. When Cynthia arrived at the shrine, she looked at the herbalist with contempt in her eyes. "You evil girl!" the herbalist yelled upon seeing her. "Evil how?" Cynthia snapped. "Don't pretend like you don't know what I'm talking about," the herbalist said as she looked on, clearly perplexed. "I have no idea what you're talking about. And with all due respect, what were those ridiculous threats about on the phone?" she asked, her eyes bloodshot. "Who did you say you wanted to use the substance on?" the herbalist demanded. "The lady who took my man from me," Cynthia replied, avoiding eye contact. "You think you're smart. You've forgotten there's nothing hidden under the sun. Well, I've found out who you really used the substance on, and I must say, I'm heavily disappointed. No wonder you were in such a hurry the other day," the herbalist said, clapping his hands in frustration. "So who do you think I used it on?" Cynthia asked defensively. "You're asking the obvious. I called you here to find out what your blood sister did to deserve such cruel treatment from you, and to demand that you stop using the substance immediately before something unimaginable happens. That reason is best known to me, and I don't think I owe you any explanation. Besides, I paid a good amount for that substance, so my secret should be safe with you. Right now, I alone will determine how long I use it," she retorted coldly. "You weren't honest from the beginning about who the substance was for. If you had been, I would never have given it to you," the herbalist snapped. "So what do you plan to do now that you've found out? Tell everyone I'm the one behind my sister's suffering?" Cynthia asked, her voice rising. She wasn't sure how he had discovered the truth, but it wasn't far-fetched to assume the oracle might have revealed something to him. "No, quite the contrary. I intend to strike a deal with you, in exchange for my silence." "What deal?" "Name your price and I'll pay you in excess," Cynthia offered arrogantly. "Number. It's not money I want. I don't need your money right now. I want something better." The herbalist stared at her from head to toe. "Old man, just tell me what you want already. I'm losing my patience," Cynthia said rudely. "You, just you," the herbalist declared, licking his lower lip. Whatever the herbalist meant by the word "you" wasn't clear to Cynthia until he stood up and stated his intention plainly after attempting to touch her breasts. Cynthia looked at him contemptuously. She almost pushed him but had to control herself. She resisted the urge to hit him in the face. "What did you just say?" "You're old enough to be my grandfather," Cynthia yelled at him. "I might be old, but I have the agility of a tiger." The herbalist smiled, revealing his discolored, cracked set of teeth. When he held Cynthia's hand, her heart skipped a beat. "Please, I can't strike a deal of paying in kind. Just name your price and I'll pay it," Cynthia said in a calmer tone. She had to swallow her pride and pleaded with the herbalist to reconsider his decision. However, no matter how hard Cynthia pleaded, the herbalist remained adamant and even ordered her to begin the affair with him right away. The thought of lying with someone who was old enough to be her grandfather made her heart cringe. Cynthia had goosebumps all over as she followed the herbalist into his room. Inside, the building looked like it had barely seen the light of day, and strange sculptures on the walls looked eerie. The herbalist seemed to be in a rush as he immediately began undressing himself. Tears welled up in Cynthia's eyes when he came closer and took off her gown. "If only I could turn back the hands of time, perhaps I wouldn't have fallen victim to this dirty old man," Cynthia soliloquized. She badly yearned for a gun at that moment, wishing she could blow the herbalist's brains out when he pinned her down on the bed after she struggled with him. Contrary to Cynthia's expectations, the herbalist lasted longer than she had imagined. She had belittled his strength because of his age and underestimated his stamina. She had imagined him with a weak reproductive system, but what happened on the bed proved otherwise. "You are so delicious," the herbalist said, licking his lips after he was done with her. Cynthia hissed and stormed out of the room with her pants in her hands. She was about to leave the compound when the herbalist called after her, telling her that this wouldn't be the last time they would be together and that she should expect to visit him often. From all indications, the herbalist didn't have a wife, or if he did, she was probably far away, Cynthia thought. When she arrived home, she immediately sped into the bathroom with a bucket in her hand and took a long bath. As she rushed out, she almost hit her mother with the bucket, her sponge case and soap scattered on the floor beside her mother's feet. It was unusual for Cynthia to run into the bathroom like that, especially after spending long hours with the so-called friend. That got her mother worried. When Cynthia's mother asked her what was wrong, she hissed and went into the bedroom, avoiding her mother's questions. Antonia was asleep, and their father had gone out hunting by the time Cynthia returned from the herbalist's place. Lying on the bed, Cynthia reflected on what had happened between her and the herbalist and felt utterly filthy. The sounds he had made, almost like a grotesque soundtrack, haunted her and intensified her anger. Dark thoughts, including the idea of eliminating the herbalist, crept into her mind multiple times. After much brooding, Cynthia decided to save her energy and instead exploit the situation to her advantage. She decided to use the herbalist to completely destroy her sister. The thought of everything she could accomplish with his help thrilled her, and she soon smiled to herself. She didn't go out for sales that day, as it was already late. After waking up from a nap, she decided to pay Chike a visit. When she arrived at Cheek's house, a servant directed her upstairs after receiving permission from his master. Cheek had drunk heavily by the time Cynthia got to him. He was about to drink more when she stopped him. Cynthia looked into Chike's teary eyes and caressed his cheek. She comforted him with soothing words. In his drunken state, Chike confused her for Antonia. Cynthia saw the perfect opportunity and allowed the confusion to linger. She didn't make any attempt to correct him. She was overjoyed when Chike went down on her and made love to her in his bedroom. She responded willingly, holding his hands and enjoying his touch. The way Chike pleasured her in the bedroom temporarily erased the awful memory of the herbalist. Cynthia was still basking in that experience when Chike suddenly sat up in bed in the middle of the night and stared at her strangely. He rubbed his eyes intensely and nearly screamed when he realized it was Cynthia in bed with him. Cynthia, now panicked, began defending herself through tears when he asked how it had happened. She claimed he had pinned her to his chest despite her repeated refusals, and she couldn't overpower him. Her explanation was so detailed and convincing that it left no room for doubt. Chike, overwhelmed with guilt and regret, left the bedroom and coldly told her to sleep alone. He wished he could undo what had happened. It was already late, and the heavy rain outside made it impossible to send her home. But at the break of dawn, Cynthia was woken from sleep by the cold, stern look on Chike's face. When Cynthia arrived home and was bombarded with all sorts of questions about where she had spent the night and her earlier strange behavior, she replied that her friend hadn't been in good shape when she paid her a visit, and that she had gone out again in the evening to check on her. "I was about going home when the rain started. It rained heavily, and I couldn't return. That's why I texted Antonia, telling her I wouldn't make it home due to the heavy downpour," Cynthia explained, looking in her sister's direction. "A message wasn't enough. Moreover, you didn't say where you were in the message, and it's suspicious that your phone was switched off right after. Don't tell me you're sleeping around," her father charged at her. "No, I'm not," Cynthia replied, her voice shaking. "You had better not be," he snapped, stamping his feet before walking away to prepare for work. After he left, her mother began scolding her. Cynthia burned with rage as her mother continued the scolding in Antonia's presence, while Antonia silently looked on. Antonia, on the other hand, was growing weaker by the day, weighed down by the horrific condition that had befallen her. Most times, she seemed lost in a world of her own, buried deep in thoughts about her predicament, how it had come about and why. Unfortunately for Antonia, her many questions were left unanswered. But despite Antonia's suffering and her present state, Cynthia was far from satisfied. She wanted to reduce her sister to ashes. Cynthia stormed out of her mother's presence and went into her room to prepare for the day's sales. She had missed the previous day's market because of the herbalist's demands and didn't want to risk losing her customers again. Once she was done preparing, she headed into town to sell her food. While selling at the market, a few people passed by and identified her as the sister of the Antonia who messed herself up like a toddler. Their words pleased Cynthia. It thrilled her to know that her sister's shame had spread across town and that her chances of attracting suitors had greatly diminished. However, Cynthia's excitement was short-lived. Her mood quickly dropped when she remembered the time limit the herbalist had warned her about. If she continued with the substance beyond that duration, she stood a chance of becoming a murderer. The reality of that possibility struck her. She had been injecting the substance in large amounts into Antonia's meals, often without a break. Cynthia decided it was best to stop using the substance, at least for now, until she found another deadly replacement, something equally effective and untraceable, like the herbalist's potion. Even the village medicine man hadn't been able to figure out what was wrong with Antonia, despite using several herbs. After Cynthia completed her sales for the day, she went to the market to purchase items for the next day's preparation. On her way, she came across the man she had once helped with directions to the palace. She wanted to ignore him at first, but he ran after her and caught up. That was when she realized he still remembered her, just as she remembered him. "Hey, beauty, where are you going with all these heavy loads?" the man asked cheerfully. "To the market. I want to get items for tomorrow's sales," Cynthia responded. "So you sell food around town, right?" he asked, glancing at the goods in her hands. "Of course I do." "Then you must be the famous food seller I've heard about," the man said with a hearty smile. "Really? I'm famous?" Cynthia asked with a hint of amusement. "Yes, I bet you don't even know it," he replied, and Cynthia smiled. "So tell me, what are you still doing around town?" "I thought you said you came here for trade." "I'm only following the king's orders. He asked that I stay in the palace to serve his son and him. I think it's a good idea, and it's beneficial for me," he explained. "Do you make most of those fabrics on your own?" Cynthia asked. "Yes, a large portion of them are handmade by me, but I do import some as well," he replied confidently. "That's cool," Cynthia said, getting ready to continue walking. "Let me help you with your loads, my lady. It would be rude of me to walk beside you while you carry all this by yourself," he offered. "Oh, it's no problem. I'm fine," Cynthia replied. "I insist. Please let me help," he said, and took some of the items from her hands. After they arrived at the market, Cynthia bought all the items she needed for the next day and started heading home, with the cloth merchant still walking beside her. At some point, Cynthia asked if she was disturbing his plans, and he responded warmly that she wasn't. "I didn't come out with any particular motive. I just wanted to stroll around town until your beauty struck me from afar. Permit me to say, you're indeed beautiful," he said, smiling. Cynthia blushed repeatedly at his words. She had heard compliments before from other admirers, but theirs were hollow and meaningless. Strangely, the compliments from the cloth merchant felt sincere. They struck a chord deep within her. Her smile suddenly turned into a scowl as she remembered the dreams she had about her sister and the prince. "Why isn't the prince the one saying this to me instead of him?" she muttered to herself. "Hello," the cloth merchant said when he realized he no longer had Cynthia's attention. "Oh!" Cynthia jolted out of her thoughts and quickly smiled at him. "Hope you're okay?" he asked with concern. "Of course I am. Just remembered something." "Let's keep walking," Cynthia replied, adjusting the cooler on her head. "Can we see each other some other time?" "I'd love to hang out with you one of these days," he said, smiling warmly at her. Cynthia had meant to say no at first, but she often felt bored at home. She figured this might be a good opportunity to go out, so she agreed. "Can we exchange contacts if you don't mind?" the cloth merchant asked as he pulled out his phone. Cynthia input her number into his phone, and he did the same on hers. Before they parted ways, he stopped at a local shop and bought her a packaged, non-alcoholic wine. Cynthia didn't realize the wine was meant for her until they were almost at her doorstep, and he handed it over. "Thank you," Cynthia said sincerely when he insisted she take it, telling her it was specially for her. A few hours after she arrived home, Cynthia received a call from the cloth merchant. They chatted for a few minutes, and he reminded her about their plan to hang out the next day. Cynthia told him she agreed and that they could start seeing each other more often. After the call ended, Cynthia saw her sister at the entrance. Antonia looked frail and pale, like someone fighting for her life. She had lost all her energy and had become a shadow of her former self. As Antonia struggled into the room after opening the door, a foul, toxic smell followed her. "Did you poo on yourself again?" Cynthia asked in a frantic tone. Antonia responded that it was something worse. She revealed that she hadn't defecated on herself for the past 2 days, but an unusual discharge had been occurring in her underwear. It was sticky and blood-like. After hearing this, Cynthia shook her head slowly. "I hope she won't just drop dead," she muttered under her breath while staring at her sister. Her conscience had been pricking her deeply since seeing what remained of Antonia. Day by day, she grew worse, and her beauty was fading fast. It was as though every passing second was draining more life out of her. Antonia now looked like the walking dead, a result of the excessive volume of the toxic substance Cynthia had been secretly adding to her meals. The thought of becoming a murderer terrified Cynthia, but she couldn't bear the idea of her sister recovering, regaining her beauty, and stealing everyone's attention again. She also didn't want Antonia and Chike reconciling, because Cynthia wanted Chike for herself. Even if nothing eventually happened between her and Chike, she'd rather see him end up with someone else than with Antonia. "Maybe I should visit Baba tomorrow and ask if there's a remedy for the discharge. That way I won't be directly responsible for her death," she reasoned inwardly after Antonia pleaded with her to help find a cure for the strange ailment. "That old man will definitely ask for something in return," Cynthia muttered to herself, looking away. She snapped back to reality when her sister pleaded again. At first glance, she did feel a bit of pity, especially with the thought that she might end up a murderer if things got worse. She had heard tales of ghosts haunting people responsible for their deaths, and the fear of that haunted her. If only I could control everything. It would be pleasant watching her writhe in pain with that discharge for days, Cynthia whispered to herself. Whatever Cynthia felt, deep down, she was more pleased watching Antonia suffer in her misery, even if it meant risking becoming a murderer, than helping her get cured and having it all backfire someday. Despite her heartless thoughts, she grudgingly picked up her phone after Antonia left the room and called the herbalist. She told him she needed to see him the next day. Cynthia got offended when the herbalist insinuated that her visit had another motive entirely. Over the phone, he boasted about his sexual prowess and told her he would eat her up when next they met. His crude comments made her heart cringe, and she felt like hitting the heck out of him. Her rage was visible, almost threatening to bring the room and everything in it crashing down. If only wishes were horses, she would possess the kind of power the herbalist had, so she wouldn't have to succumb to his will. One thing was certain about the visit to the herbalist's house the following day. He would demand his way with her before agreeing to help. Still, if that would satisfy the conscience that constantly pricked her, she was willing to go through with it. The following day, Cynthia woke up as early as she could. She had a hard time leaving the house after her father left for hunting. Eventually, after much pleading and several assurances that she wouldn't stay too long at her friend's house, her mother allowed her to go. Cynthia walked briskly through town, avoiding anyone who crossed her path. She moved like an antelope being chased. By the time she arrived at the herbalist's abode, she was panting for breath and totally exhausted. "Beautiful one," the herbalist said as he stood up and hugged her upon sighting her. There was an unsettling tone in the air after that hug. The way Cynthia looked at him made him pause, and he asked why she had come. "That's what you should have asked first before jumping at me," Cynthia replied as he asked her to sit. "I'm sorry," What made you sound so urgent over the phone? The herbalist asked. I'm in trouble. Big trouble, Cynthia said, clearly in distress. Trouble? That's an abomination in my land. Tell me what troubles your heart, and I'll bring a solution, the herbalist said, rubbing his chest with both palms. Cynthia smiled faintly and began explaining her dilemma. The herbalist sighed heavily when she finished. But I warned you against using it in large amounts. I clearly stated the consequences, he said. This isn't the time for blame. Help me, wise one. I've bitten off more than I can chew, Cynthia pleaded, falling to her knees. The antidote takes a lot to make, but I'm willing to do it for free. However, it's not available now. You'll need to come back in 3 days to get it. Ah, 3 days? I'm afraid she'll drop dead before then, she cried. You don't need to worry. I wouldn't make a baseless promise. For now, there's a temporary solution to stop the discharge. I have something in my room that can keep it from persisting, and I'll give it to you before you leave. He smirked. Please give it to me already. I'm tired and I need to return home soon. I promised my mother I wouldn't stay out long, Cynthia pleaded again. Not so fast, my beautiful wife. You'll have to give me what I desire before I give it to you, the herbalist said, reaching down to his stiffening phallus and rubbing it against his thigh. Instantly, Cynthia felt like vomiting. Disgust swept across her face. How could she tell this old man that she wanted nothing of the sort, especially when she was in a desperate situation? But Baba, Cynthia's voice trailed off in reluctance. I won't take long with you, my wife, the herbalist said with a creepy smile. But why do you call me your wife? Cynthia asked suddenly as they walked into his room. Because I have no woman in my life, and ever since that first time we were together, I've imagined you spending more time with me, having a child that would carry on my heritage. I must confess, Cynthia, you are sweet, he chuckled. Cynthia forced a smile and said nothing more. To her, there was no point arguing with the old man. Doing so would only waste more time, and she was already at his mercy. He would still get what he wanted. After he had his way with her, Cynthia collected the substance meant to stop Antonia's discharge and left. On her way home, she struggled with the urge to throw the substance away, disgusted by what she had gone through to get it. As she approached her house, she saw the prince from afar, riding a horse alone with no guards in sight. It seemed like the perfect moment to approach him. She was just about to walk up to him when the cloth merchant suddenly appeared and ran to hug her.
He's such bad luck. He had to appear just when I was about to shoot my shot, Cynthia muttered under her breath amidst the tight hug. When the cloth merchant finally released Cynthia from his embrace, he introduced her to the prince and told him that Cynthia was a very good friend of his. Who wouldn't recognize royalty in our town? Your presence speaks volumes, Cynthia praised, as the cloth merchant completed the introduction. The prince responded with a warm smile and thanked her sincerely. Soon after, Cynthia parted ways with the prince and the cloth merchant, though the latter told her he'd call later in the day to check up on her. Despite enjoying the attention, Cynthia was irritated by the cloth merchant's lovey-dovey behavior in the prince's presence. She worried it might ruin her chances. If the prince assumed they had something going on, he might back off, even if he had romantic interest in her. To Cynthia, the prince was as much of a catch as Chike. Getting either of them would be a win, considering Chike had wealth that rivaled royalty, if not more. As for the cloth merchant, she could play along with him to keep herself busy while working toward her real goals. One thing was certain, she would not allow her sister to end up with a good man, not after everything. Even if she didn't get Chike, it was satisfying enough that she had ruined the possibility of him ending up with Antonia. If he ever came close to her sister again, Cynthia was prepared to expose the intimate moment they had shared. When Cynthia got home, she was unsure of what to do with the substance the herbalist had given her to stop the discharge. Her opportunity came later that afternoon. She added the substance to a meal she had prepared. Antonia hadn't touched the morning meal, claiming she was simply waiting for death, as nothing seemed to work anymore. It took a great deal of effort and persuasion before Cynthia could convince Antonia to eat. Idiot. You should be thanking your stars for this, Cynthia muttered to herself as she coaxed her sister. After eating, Antonia fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up, it felt like a veil had lifted. She sensed something had changed. The usual evening discharge didn't occur. Earlier in the day, she had changed her underwear due to a morning episode, but afterward, nothing happened. No new discharge. It was a mystery to Antonia, who spent the entire night reflecting on the miracle. Cynthia, seeing her sister smile again, instantly understood. The prescription from the herbalist had worked. She had followed the instructions and ensured Antonia got a proper dose of the substance. By early morning, the change in Antonia's condition was visible. She was cheerful and hopeful. Did I do the right thing? Cynthia asked herself quietly as she observed her sister's joy. She scoffed and walked into her bedroom after sweeping the compound. "Great," she muttered under her breath. But come to think of it, why am I staying quiet when I could be the hero in this story? Why shouldn't I take all the praise the way Antonia always does? She smiled to herself as she shut the door behind her. Cynthia stepped out of her bedroom and asked her mother, father, and elder sister to take a seat. She had something important to discuss. Apologies, everyone. I didn't call this meeting to waste anyone's time, nor am I doing this for show. This is about my sister, Antonia. Cynthia stood up and gently patted her sister on the back. I know you must be amazed by the sudden change in your condition, but don't be afraid. It's not the work of a spell or some strange miracle. It was me. I mixed the cure into your meal yesterday. If you noticed, the transformation started after you ate. She paused briefly, then turned to their parents. Father, mother, the friend I claimed I was visiting in the neighboring town. That was a lie. When the local herbalist couldn't provide a solution and none of the medications from doctors helped, I couldn't just sit back and watch my sister suffer any longer. So I took a bold risk. I traveled far, to the outskirts of town, to visit a feared herbalist. Cynthia paused and wiped away fake tears threatening to fall from her eyes. It was a dangerous decision, and it cost me a lot, but at least my sister is feeling better now. My only prayer is that the healing lasts. I'm truly sorry for keeping you all in the dark, but honestly, would you have agreed to let me carry out such a risky mission? A journey that could have led me to a place where the living dare not go? I doubt it. She took a deep breath, finishing her speech. Ah! You did all that for your elder sister? Her mother exclaimed in shock. I can't believe you sacrificed yourself for me to that extent, Antonia said, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. I always knew there was something good in you, her father added, pulling her into a warm embrace. Overcome with emotion, the family began showering Cynthia with praise, singing her name and celebrating her supposed bravery. While they were showering her with praises, Cynthia had a hard time not bursting into laughter. Gullible people. So innocent, she muttered to herself. When her sister hugged her, she side-eyed her in the midst of the embrace. Her parents were too excited to notice her expression. Thank you for loving me, little sis. May the heavens bless you and show you the light, Antonia said softly. Amen, Cynthia replied. I owe you a big one, Antonia added, caressing her cheek before settling back on the couch. Later, their father went out for his daily activities, and Cynthia followed suit a few minutes afterward. While making her sales, Cynthia had second thoughts about returning to the herbalist for the full treatment that would ensure Antonia's complete healing. She eventually decided it wasn't worth the stress. Although the herbalist had explained that the full remedy would flush out the toxins from Antonia's system and help her regain her glow, Cynthia shrugged it off. Her body should figure out the rest on its own. I could care less about the damage being reversed. I've done my part. At least she won't die, she muttered, focusing back on her food stall. As she continued selling, Cynthia's eyes caught sight of Chike walking past. He looked gloomy and terribly worn out. She had been trying to reach him for days to no avail. He wouldn't answer her calls or reply to her texts. The few times he accidentally picked up, he hung up the moment he heard her voice. You didn't see me? Cynthia asked as she approached him. Chike ignored her and continued walking. I've suddenly become a barking dog after you used me, right? Cynthia yelled. Please. Stop yelling. People might hear you and misunderstand, Chike said quietly, looking around. I couldn't care less about rolling in the mud. I've got nothing to lose. I can easily play the victim, and believe me, I'll do it well. You're the Please, not here, Chike interrupted, visibly uneasy. A part of Chike still held out hope for a future with Antonia despite everything. Though she had pushed him away after the party and said she wasn't worthy of him, he kept praying for her recovery. Many nights he lit a candle and silently begged for her healing. Rumors around town that no remedy had worked on Antonia reached him, deepening his concern. He clung to hope, even if it seemed naive. To him, whatever had happened with Cynthia felt like a haze, something he hadn't consciously chosen. He hadn't fully acknowledged it, dismissing it as insignificant. Yet the memory of that night sometimes crept up and gnawed at him, shaking his feelings for Antonia. "If you want me to stop yelling, then we need to talk this evening. I'll send the location before nightfall," Cynthia said. Chike bowed his head in resignation and walked away. After he left, Cynthia began plotting how to use the situation to her advantage. As promised, she texted the location to Chike before evening. There was a youth festival happening in town, so Cynthia decided to use it as her cover to lure Chike. When the time came, she left the house pretending she was attending the festival, wrapped in a lovely outfit and a scarf. Her skin glowed like bronze even in the dim evening light, thanks to a generous mix of shea butter and coconut oil. She walked with confidence, striding down the quiet path to the agreed location. Just as she neared the meeting point, her phone rang. It was the cloth merchant. He'd tried calling earlier in the morning, but she hadn't been in the mood to talk. Seeing his name flash on her screen irritated her. "Not now," she muttered, then switched off her phone to avoid further distractions. At the meeting spot, Chike stood waiting with arms folded. When he saw Cynthia approaching, his eyes widened in awe. Her radiant appearance left him momentarily speechless. He had never seen her dressed with such elegance. His gaze lingered on her exposed cleavage before he caught himself and quickly composed his expression. "You asked to meet, here I am," Chike said. "Let's sit," Cynthia replied with a gentle smile. They sat down, and Cynthia locked eyes with him, smiling. She held the stare long enough to rattle him, drawing his attention completely. "Time is running out," Chike began, but before he could finish, Cynthia suddenly threw herself at him. He inhaled the sweet scent of her body and instinctively grabbed her waist as she pretended to stumble. "What am I doing right now?" Chike asked himself, feeling the pull of temptation. He felt like he was under a spell, something he couldn't explain, yet it gripped him fully. Just as his thoughts began spiraling, Cynthia took his lips in hers. "What do you want from me?" Chike asked afterward, breathless. "All of you. I want all of you." "Again and again," Cynthia whispered, tracing a finger across his temple. He jerked at her touch, overwhelmed and confused.